The pencil made a soft, rhythmic tick against the ledger. Outside, the wind combed through the pine trees that surrounded the Montana camp, carrying the smell of coal smoke and frost. Inside the wooden administrative hut, 20 German women stood in a crooked line, boots leaving wet prints on the floorboards. The air smelled of soap and kerosene. Somewhere in the corner, a stove coughed and hissed. They had been told to report for registration, again. No one asked why. They were used to standing in lines, used to silence, used to the American guard's clipped tone that fell somewhere between polite and tired. Through a crack in the wall, sunlight fell in a long white bar, catching the dust as it floated between them. Most of the women had been awake since before dawn, their hair still damp from washing in cold water. Their uniforms, patched gray dresses and wool cardigans that never quite fit, smelled faintly of bleach. The American clerk at the table was young, maybe 25, with narrow glasses and a uniform too big in the shoulders. His typewriter sat beside the ledger, keys gleaming. Every few minutes, he would glance up, then down again, tapping his pencil against the margin like a metronome. No one spoke. Even breathing felt rehearsed. The women had learned that questions slowed the day, and slowing the day meant more attention, more waiting. A gust of wind rattled the window pane. One of the women, older, wrapped her shawl tighter. Another shifted her weight, and the wooden floor creaked beneath her boots. Then came the faint sound of an engine, the growl of a truck backing up near the supply shed. Someone coughed. The pencil ticked again. In a far corner, a notice board carried neat rows of English words: work, assignments, laundry, kitchen, canning plant. Below it, someone had pinned a drawing of a cartoon soldier with a broom. Beneath that, in smaller handwriting, cleanliness is morale. The women looked at it without expression. They had stopped finding meaning in slogans months ago. One of them, Anna, a former shorthand secretary from Dusseldorf, watched the clerk's hand move steady, neat. She noticed how the blue veins stood out on his wrist, how the paper curled slightly at the corners, how the ink had soaked in just enough to feather. She thought, everything here smells clean, even the fear. Behind her, boots on gravel again, the guard returning. The door opened, letting in a rush of cold air that smelled like snow and pine pitch. "All right, ladies," he said. "Line up closer. We've got a change today." A few heads lifted, just enough to look. The pencil stopped tapping. Something was different. The kind of different that made even silence lean forward. The guard cleared his throat. His voice carried that mix of command and discomfort that comes when someone must give orders they don't fully understand. "New procedure," he said. "Starting today, you'll each pick a name, an American name." For a moment, the room didn't react at all, only the stove clanked and settled. The women exchanged small, uncertain glances. The translator, a young woman who had taught English in Leipzig before the war, blinked twice, unsure she'd heard right. She repeated it in German, slowly. Sagt, wir sollen uns amerikanische Namen aussuchen. He says we are to choose American names. Still silence. Then a few short laughs, dry and brittle like twigs breaking. "Why?" someone muttered. "Are we actors now?" Another voice, older, sharper. "They want to erase us." The clerk behind the table lifted his eyes for the first time. "It's just for work records," he said gently. "Easier for the foreman at the cannery. You'll still have your number." But the words "pick any name you want" hung there. Impossible. Choice was not something they'd been offered in years. One woman crossed her arms, staring at the floor. Another shifted closer to the stove, rubbing her hands together as if to warm them, though the gesture looked more like hesitation. The pencil tapped again, patient. The sergeant folded his arms and nodded toward the ledger. "All right, let's go. Line by line." A murmur passed through the group, half disbelief, half resignation. The translator stepped forward, lips pressed thin, as if volunteering to test the water for poison. She leaned over the table. "Any name?" she asked. The clerk nodded. "Any name you like." Her eyes flicked across the page. Beneath the printed lines, surname, given name, camp number. The paper looked shockingly blank, like fresh snow. Outside, a door slammed somewhere. The sound echoed across the yard and back into the hut. No one moved yet. They all waited to see what this meant to be told, for once, to choose. The first woman stepped forward. Her shoes scraped the floor. The sergeant nodded to the clerk, who turned the ledger around and slid it toward her. The page caught a sliver of sunlight, white and clean, waiting. The woman hesitated, her hand hovering above the paper. Her fingernails were short, the edges cracked from months of scrubbing floors. "What name should I take?" she whispered. The translator shrugged. "Anything you like. Something easy to say in English." The woman bit her lip, eyes darting to the far wall, where a flag hung motionless. Then she wrote Margaret. The pen trembled, the ink thick. When she stepped back, the line behind her shifted like a long animal learning to breathe again. Next came Anna, the secretary from Dusseldorf. She stared down at the page. Her mind flickered to her father's handwriting on the family Bible, to the signatures on her school certificates. Names had always felt like fences, things you stayed inside. But here, the gate was open. She wrote Anne. Just one letter dropped, but it looked different enough to be someone new. The N trailed slightly upward at the end, as if unsure whether to stop or keep going. The sergeant repeated it aloud. Anne. The sound was short, clean, almost kind. Behind her, Greta, the tall woman with soot on her sleeves from the boiler room, watched closely. When her turn came, she grinned in a way that felt both defiant and shy. Grace, she said, and spelled it slowly, each letter a small rebellion. Liesel, the youngest, barely 20, frowned. "What if we forget who we were?" she asked softly. The translator didn't answer. One by one, they moved down the line. Each name chosen half in irony, half in wonder. Ruth, Helen, Mary, June. Names they'd heard in films or on ration tins. Names that sounded soft in the mouth, without the weight of consonants from home. When the last woman signed, the clerk stacked the papers neatly and passed each a small square of cloth. Their new names were printed in black, still damp with ink. "Pin it on," he said. "You'll need it at work detail." The women stood together, silent, staring at one another's patches. Anne, Grace, Helen, as though they were looking at ghosts that bore their faces. Outside, the wind had died. Somewhere, a bell rang from the canteen, its chime, thin and metallic. Lunch hour. But no one moved. They had all just been renamed. By afternoon, the patches were sewn on. Crooked stitches, uneven thread, black ink still faintly damp against the gray wool. The women lined up outside the canning building, breath misting in the cold, hands stiff from the needlework. The American foreman, broad shoulders, sleeves rolled, stood at the doorway with his clipboard. He cleared his throat. "Roll call," he said. The clerk beside him began reading from the new list. Anne. Anna. Now Anne stepped forward automatically. The name landed in her ears like a stone dropped into deep water. No echo, no splash. Then, Grace. Greta raised her chin and smiled without meaning to. The name sounded light, almost tender, like something you'd whisper to a child. Liz. Mary. Ruth. Each name struck the air differently, clean and foreign, erasing the hardness of the German syllables they'd carried all their lives. Inside the cannery, the noise swallowed, words metal clatter, steam hiss, conveyor belts humming like insects. The women took their stations, washing tins, wiping lids, sealing crates, marked U.S. Army Food Supply. The foreman moved between them, nodding approval. "Good work, ladies," he said, and though none of them understood every word, they caught the rhythm of praise. At first, they wore the names like ill-fitting shoes. They answered too slowly, or not at all. But by the third day, the roll call moved faster. "Anne?" "Here." The syllable leapt out of her mouth before she thought. And just like that, she belonged to it. At mealtime, they found themselves using the new names to each other, half in jest, half in surrender. "Grace, pass the soap." "Sure thing, Anne." They laughed quietly at how strange it sounded. Strange and strangely right. Sometimes the guards used the names too. "Anne, careful with that blade." "Thanks, Sergeant." It felt like conversation, not command. That night, in the barracks, the patches hung by the bunks, drying on twine above the stove. The ink bled slightly, where the heat rose, letters softening at the edges. Liesl, now Liz, sat cross-legged on her cot, tracing her new name with a finger. "What happens," she asked, "when we go home? Do we give them back?" Greta Grace was polishing her boots. "They can't take what's already inside you," she said. Then, after a pause, added, "But they can make you forget what was." A few women nodded, some smiling, some not. The mood in the camp began to shift imperceptibly, like a door easing open. The guards greeted them with nods instead of orders. The mess hall music played a little longer after meals. And on Sundays, when the wind came down from the mountains and shook the barracks, a few of the women hummed along to the American songs they barely understood. One evening, Anne caught her reflection in the window. The glass was warped, showing two faces, the one she'd carried from Germany, and the one that answered to an English name. For a moment, she thought she could see both breathing inside the same frame, one tired, one waking. In her bunk that night, she wrote the name again and again on a scrap of paper. Anne, Anne, Anne. The handwriting looked unfamiliar, almost graceful. She folded the scrap and tucked it into her shoe. Not to hide it, but to keep it close to the ground, so that when she walked, the name would move with her. Outside, the camp was quiet. The sky had gone the color of tin. And somewhere beyond the fence, a dog barked twice, then stopped, as if reminding her that the world was still out there waiting, under other names. That night, the barracks glowed with a low orange light from the iron stove. Outside, snow brushed softly against the tin roof, a steady whisper that made the room feel smaller, safer. The women sat at the long table, each with a scrap of paper and a pencil stub, supplies issued for language practice, the guard had said. In truth, most used them to write what couldn't be spoken aloud. Anne, once Anna, sat nearest the stove. Her hands were warm for the first time all day. She began her letter the way she always had. Liebe Mutter, ich lebe noch. Dear Mother, I'm still alive. Then she stopped. The next words refused to come. Her handwriting felt strange, even her own name uncertain. She wrote it out of habit. Anna Muller then hesitated, staring at the page. She could almost hear the clerk's voice from earlier that week. "Pick any name you want." And so she wrote again, beneath the first. Ann Miller. Two names, one above the other, Germany and America, before and after. She looked at them for a long time, the graphite smudging slightly under her fingertips. Across from her, Greta Grace now was hunched over her own letter, tongue pressed to her lip in concentration. "How do you spell forgiven?" she whispered to the translator. The translator murmured the letters slowly, as if each one were fragile glass. "Forgiven." Greta nodded, repeating it quietly, like a prayer. Liesl Liz wasn't writing at all. She sat with her hands folded on the table, staring at the blank sheet before her. "If I write my real name," she said softly, "it feels like I'm lying about who I am now. But if I write this new one..." She trailed off. Grace looked up. "Then you're lying about who you were." For a while, no one spoke. The stove hissed. The smell of damp wool filled the air. Anne picked up her paper again, folded it in half, then in half again. The creases were sharp. The letter had only 2 words on it, "Dear Mother," and 2 names fighting for space below. She slipped it inside her pillowcase. Not to hide it, but because she couldn't bear to throw it away. Later, as the lights dimmed, she lay awake, listening to the others breathe. Someone was crying quietly. Not the kind of crying that demanded comfort, but the slow, private kind that leaks from the corners of a heart that doesn't know which language to use anymore. Anne turned on her side. Her name tag brushed against her cheek, the cloth rough but warm. She whispered to herself, "Anne, Anna, both." Somewhere, a train passed in the distance, its whistle long and low. She imagined it carrying letters, real ones, across plains and oceans, through borders where names didn't matter. And for the first time since arriving, she let herself believe that a name, like a letter, didn't have to reach its destination to mean something. They didn't cry because of cruelty. They cried because of choice. It was the smallest thing, ink on cloth, graphite on paper, but it meant permission. Permission to exist as more than a number, even if that existence was borrowed. In every camp across the country, Texas, Iowa, Montana, the same orders came down. New rosters, new names, easier for American tongues to pronounce. But beneath the paperwork, something else had happened, something no regulation could measure. A name was not just a sound, it was memory, condensed. A home folded into 2 syllables. A promise whispered when the world still made sense. Back in Germany, their names had been weapons or warnings. They carried family histories, stamped in letters that now tasted like ash. Here, in a foreign camp fenced with barbed wire, they were being offered new ones, not forced, but offered. That difference mattered. The narrator's voice lowers. They had been renamed before by the Reich, by propaganda, by men who decided who was pure and who was not. But this time, it was not an order, it was an invitation. An invitation to imagine another self, even if only for the length of captivity. For Anne, formerly Anna, the shift was quiet but seismic. She realized that each time someone said her new name, they also said, "You are here. You exist now." It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't freedom. But it was a recognition she hadn't expected to receive from the enemy. The film cuts between fragments. A name tag drying on a laundry line, sunlight catching the damp ink. The clerk's pencil resting on the ledger, its tip blunted with use. The women's handwriting awkward, careful on envelopes that would never be mailed. Voiceover continues. Names can be mercy. Names can also be masks. The power lies not in the sound, but in who gets to choose it. At the canteen, one woman had joked that she'd picked the name Liberty. The guard laughed, thinking it was humor. But that night, she whispered it again before sleep, not as irony, but as hope. Even within fences, people look for the smallest doors. Sometimes that door is a word. For the Americans, it was routine. Bureaucracy, efficiency, order. For the women, it was a reminder that identity could bend, not just break. That they could, for once, be something by choice, not decree. The name tags wore out over months, letters faded, edges frayed. Some replaced them, some refused. One woman stitched hers inside her collar, the letters pressing faintly against her throat when she breathed. And maybe that's all a name ever is, the pressure of being remembered, even by yourself. The camera pans across the camp in morning fog. Steam rises from the canning building. Somewhere, a man calls out names for roll. Voices answer, soft but certain. They don't sound like prisoners now. They sound like people trying on a new language, one syllable at a time. By the spring of 1945, the mountains behind the camp had turned green again. Snowmelt carved small rivers through the gravel road, and rumor moved faster than the wind. The war was ending. Germany was collapsing. The women would soon go home. The barracks felt different now. Lighter. Quieter. Even the guards walked slower, as if the whole camp were holding its breath. Inside, they packed what little they had. Spare stockings, soap, the Red Cross postcards that never got sent. And tucked among those things, folded with surprising care, were the name patches. Anne pressed hers between her palms before placing it inside a tin tobacco box. The ink had faded, the edges curled, but the letters still read clear, A-N-N. She touched it once more and smiled. "Keep it," said Grace from the next bunk, "proof that we were someone else for a while." Anne nodded, "Maybe proof that we could be." The day they left, the Americans lined the yard. No speeches, no salutes, just nods and brief goodbyes. When the train whistle sounded, the women stepped forward, carrying everything they owned in one bag and something invisible that wasn't there when they'd arrived. At the platform, the sergeant who'd first told them, "Pick any name you want," stood by the gate. When Anne passed, he hesitated, then said softly, "Take care, Anne." She looked at him, really looked, and answered, Thank you, Sergeant. Her voice didn't tremble. Hours later, as the train cut across endless plains, she pulled out the patch again. Outside the window, the world blurred into color and wind. She whispered the name once under her breath, then tucked it inside her coat lining. Months later, in Dusseldorf, standing amid bricks and ash, she introduced herself at a ration line. Name? The clerk asked, pencil poised. She hesitated just a heartbeat too long. Then, Anna Müller. The clerk wrote it down and didn't look up. But that night, when she signed her name on a scrap receipt for bread, her hand slipped, out of habit. A single N, repeated at the end Ann. She stared at it. The smallest mistake, or maybe not a mistake at all. Voiceover closes softly. Some names survive wars, and some are born from them. The women who left that camp went home, carrying more than rations and memories. They carried proof that even inside fences, identity could still be chosen. And choice, however small, is its own kind of freedom. Fade out. Wind, faint birdsong, and the scratch of a pencil starting a new page.